Over the past 10 months, the Attorney General has testified before the Senate on 3 occasions. This is about his knowledge of and his contact with Russian operatives. He's also answered written questions, and he's provided supplementary testimony. But no matter how much he's tried, he has not gotten his story straight. On numerous occasions, new disclosures of his communications involving Russia have raised serious questions about his testimony. Did you want to go first? They raised questions about his testimony, and not one of these disclosures has come from the Attorney General. These disclosures haven't been from the Attorney General correcting what he had said before. All have come from the press or unsealed court records. Now that's a problem. This started in January. At his nomination hearing, both Senator Franken and I asked him about contacts with Russian officials. I asked him in writing whether he'd been in contact with anyone connected to the Russian government about the 2016 election. Now, that's not a tricky or a surprising question. Other Trump officials, undisclosed contacts with Russians, like those of Michael Flynn or Jared Kushner, were major headlines at the time. Under oath, then Senator Sessions answered with a single and very unambiguous word, no. Well, we soon learned that the unambiguous answer was yes, just the opposite of his answer. In March, the Washington Post reported that Mr. Sessions met with Russian Ambassador Kislyak on 2 occasions during the height of the 2016 campaign. Days later, the Attorney General was forced to recuse himself from the Russian investigation. In June, though, the press reported on a 3rd undisclosed contact. In July, despite the Attorney General's previous assertions that he never discussed the campaign with Russian officials, U.S. intelligence intercepts reportedly revealed he'd done just that, discussing the campaign and his position on Russian-related issues with the Russian ambassador. So the Attorney General, to his credit and his duty, came before the Judiciary Committee last month. And I asked him about this report. Well, his testimony changed again. He acknowledged it was possible he had these conversations. Remember, originally he said no. Well, it flatly contradicts his testimony to me in January. What makes it more troubling, these disclosures show no sign of stopping. 2 weeks ago, unsealed court records revealed additional Russian connections that were discussed during a Trump campaign meeting in March 2016. Then Senator Sessions reportedly admonished those in attendance to not discuss the issue again out of fear it would leak to the press. And just last week, another foreign policy campaign aide of the Trump campaign testified they informed Mr. Sessions of his planned trip to Russia in July 2016. Now, once again, I mentioned all of these different testimonies and descriptions. They're impossible to reconcile with the Attorney General's testimony, in which he claimed under oath that he's not aware of any contact between the Trump campaign and Russian officials. It's one thing to say something casually, but these were comments he made under oath. And the notion that he's just simply forgetful is not believable. Potential Russian involvement in our elections was a major story at the time. In July 2016, then candidate Trump publicly at a rally encouraged Russia to commit espionage against his political opponent, Hillary Clinton, by stealing her emails. Everybody saw that because it was such an unprecedented thing by any candidate, Republican or Democratic, ever. He said, commit espionage, steal my opponent's emails. That same week, then Senator Sessions told CNN that people come up to him all the time to talk about Russia hacking Hillary Clinton's emails. Now, exactly who are all these people talking to about Russia hacking Hillary Clinton's emails? And should he disclose any of these conversations with the Judiciary Committee? Surely he hadn't forgotten them, and so we don't know yet. Senator Durbin recently asked him this in a written question. Plenty of time to think about it. Not too long, but think about it, and then give us a response. Now, I want another point to be clear. I've never accused the Attorney General of colluding with Russia. I'm not doing that now. But it is clear that the Kremlin tested the waters within Senator Sessions, as it did with so many other Trump campaign officials. Keep that in mind. It was very clear from what has come out, the Kremlin was testing the water with people in the Trump campaign, including then Senator Sessions. It is equally clear that the Attorney General concealed his own contacts with Russian officials. He's failed to correct the record, even when given multiple opportunities to do so. This wasn't just a little slip somewhere along the line. He's had several opportunities to correct it. Now, I agree with Senator Franken. I agree with Senator Graham. I agree with others that he needs to come back once again to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee under oath. It's time we hear the whole story. An important part of that story is what the Attorney General did on May 9th. That's the day President Trump fired Director James Comey. To justify the dismissal, the President cited a Justice Department memorandum signed off by Attorney General Sessions. The memo attempted to justify firing Director Comey because he treated Hillary Clinton unfairly during the email investigation. Now, I was born at night, but not last night. Do you really think the Trump organization wanted to fire Director Comey because he treated Hillary Clinton unfairly? I mean, this is the same Donald Trump who publicly urged the Russians to hack into her emails. Now, what we did learn, because everybody found that incredulous, we learned there was an earlier unsent letter that pointed to President Trump's true motivation for firing Director Comey, and that, of course, was the Russian investigation. The day before the dismissal, the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General reportedly were called into the White House to discuss the earlier letter, the Russian letter. The next day, they delivered their own, as of May 9th, they delivered their own hastily drafted memo that provided an alternative justification for firing Director Comey, saying he should be fired not because of investigating what Russia is doing, but because he was so mean to Hillary Clinton. Well, everybody knows the May 9th memo was a facade. It was a pretext. The White House needed to point to anything other than Russia to justify dismissing Director Comey, and the Attorney General obliged. But the president couldn't keep that secret. He had to brag about it. The very next morning, he boasted of Russian officials visiting the Oval Office that firing Director Comey took great pressure off of him from the Russia investigation. And 2 days later, on national television, the president made clear what we all knew, but they tried to hide. He actually acknowledged it. He fired the lead Russia investigator due to concerns of how he was handling the Russia investigation. It's bad enough to do that, but then to brag to the Russians that he'd done this to help them. Now, here's another problem. If you fire an investigator, in order to stymie a legitimate investigation. You learn about this your first year in law school. It's a crime. It's called obstruction of justice. Now, whether there's sufficient evidence to merit a charge of obstruction against the president will have to be decided by Special Counsel Mueller. If so, the Attorney General may have to admit the May 9th memo that he approved was nothing but a smokescreen, an attempt to mask an uncomfortable truth and to excuse the inexcusable. From my experience, prosecutors don't look kindly upon those who aid others in covering up a crime. Now, for many years, I sat with Senator Sessions on the Judiciary Committee. We traveled together. We disagreed on many policy issues. But I've never questioned Senator Sessions' commitment to the rule of law. But I do question the president's commitment to the rule of law. This month alone, President Trump repeatedly directed the Justice Department to target his political opponents and chase his conspiracy theories. This is a president, probably more than any president since Richard Nixon, who needs to be told no. And May 9th was one of those moments. I'm greatly disappointed the Attorney General Jeff Sessions wasn't up to the task. This is a solemn obligation that goes to the heart of what it means to be Attorney General. Ensuring that no person, not even a president, is above the law. I remember when an Attorney General, under questioning before the Judiciary Committee, said, well, you know, as a member of the President's staff, I said, you're not a member of the President's staff. You're not a Secretary of Justice serving the President blindly and covering his flaws. You, that former Attorney General, this Attorney General, is Attorney General of the United States. He's supposed to serve first and foremost the American people. We don't have a Secretary of Justice like we do a Secretary of Commerce and so on. We have an Attorney General of the United States. And I fear that Attorney General Sessions has lost sight of this distinction. Now, we are in the midst of perhaps the most serious national security investigation, certainly in the decades I've been in the Senate. A foreign adversary attacked our democracy and our elections. The evidence is irrefutable that Russia was trying to attack our elections. We also know that Russia will be back. If we're serious about preventing the next attack, we have to know what happened during the last one. The American people, Democrats and Republicans alike, deserve answers. No more obfuscation, no more falsehoods. This starts with the Attorney General returning to the Senate Judiciary Committee to explain in person, under oath, why he has not provided truthful, complete answers to some of the most pressing questions facing our nation today. Now, Madam President, a senator who has been relentless in asking these questions is my distinguished colleague from Minnesota. And I yield to him. And ask consent that he be given such time as he needs.
Without objection.
Madam President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Madam President. And I thank Senator Leahy, my good friend. Madam President, new developments in the ongoing investigation into Russian interference in the election have once again raised concerns about the accuracy of statements made by Attorney General Jeff Sessions during his appearance before the Senate. In light of the Attorney General's failure to tell the truth about not just his own interactions with Russian operatives, but also the extent to which he knew about Russian contacts by other members of the Trump campaign team. I call upon Attorney General Sessions to return to the Senate Judiciary Committee and provide us with a complete and accurate accounting of the facts. Madam President, there is no question that Russia, a hostile foreign power, meddled in our election. Russia carried out this attack in order to undermine confidence in American democracy, to damage Hillary Clinton's campaign for president, and to help Donald Trump. Our intelligence agencies have confirmed this to be true, but in order to keep our country safe and prevent an attack like this from happening again, the American people need to understand what happened, including whether members of the Trump campaign either participated in the Russian operation or turned a blind eye to it. We need to get to the bottom of this, and to do that, we need to know the truth. But, Madam President, regrettably, Attorney General Sessions, our nation's chief law enforcement officer, seems to have a real problem telling the truth about both his own actions with Russians and those of the larger Trump campaign team. At his confirmation hearing in January, when I referenced a breaking report from CNN that there had been a, quote, continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump's surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government, unquote, I asked him, quote, if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do? This was a simple, straightforward question. What will you do? The implication was, would you recuse yourself? But rather than answer that question, then Senator Sessions said, quote, I did not have communications with the Russians, end quote. That, of course, was not true. It was later revealed that Attorney General Sessions had met with the Russian ambassador at least 3 times during the campaign. Only after 2 of those meetings were uncovered and disclosed, 7 weeks later, did Attorney General Sessions announce his recusal from the Russian investigation. But after he was confronted with the truth, the Attorney General began to subtly change his story. His first answer under oath before the Judiciary Committee in January was that he, quote, did not have communications with the Russians, unquote, period. But after his meetings with the Russian ambassador were exposed, Attorney General Sessions began to qualify his explanations. In a statement issued on March 2nd, the day after his Russian contacts were revealed, he said, quote, I never met with any Russian officials to discuss issues of the campaign. But in July, the Washington Post published a report suggesting that the Attorney General did discuss campaign issues with the Russian ambassador. According to the report, American intelligence agencies intercepted communications between the Russian ambassador and the Kremlin in which the ambassador described his conversations with then Senator Sessions. The 2 men reportedly talked about substantive policy matters, including campaign-related issues. In response to this report, the Justice Department issued a statement stating that Attorney General Sessions stood by his testimony and again claimed that the Attorney General did not discuss, quote, interference with any campaign or election. Madam President, each and every time that new information comes to light, about the Attorney General's contacts with the Russians, he has responded not by coming clean and admitting that his initial testimony was inaccurate, but by shifting his story and moving the goalposts. Madam President, the truth has a nasty habit of catching up with Attorney General Sessions. Recently, unsealed court documents revealed that in early October, former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos, pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his communications with Russian operatives during the campaign. The unsealed documents also revealed that Mr. Papadopoulos didn't just meet with Russian operatives during the campaign, he did so with the express goal of facilitating meetings between the Russian government and other Trump campaign officials, including the candidate himself, Donald Trump. According to the court documents, Mr. Papadopoulos made no secret of his Russian contacts. He described his Russian meetings in emails to senior campaign officials. And according to Mr. Papadopoulos, he discussed his Russian contacts with then Senator Sessions directly. On March 31st, 2016, Mr. Papadopoulos attended a meeting of the Trump campaign's National Security Advisory Committee, a group led by Attorney General Sessions, who chaired the committee and advised the candidate on foreign policy and national security matters. The court documents reveal that after Mr. Papadopoulos introduced himself to the group, he, quote, stated in sum and substance that he had connections that could help arrange a meeting between then candidate Trump and President Putin. Mr. Papadopoulos made that speech while seated 2 seats to the left of Attorney General Sessions. We know that for a fact because then candidate Trump posted a photo of the meeting on Instagram. There is then Senator Sessions, there is George Papadopoulos, and there is then candidate Donald Trump. After the court documents were unsealed, after the court documents were unsealed, reports about what happened at the March 31st meeting began to emerge. Reportedly, Mr. Papadopoulos spoke about facilitating a meeting between the candidate and the president for a few minutes. Then candidate Trump reportedly, quote, listened with interest and asked questions of Mr. Papadopoulos. But according to an advisor present at the meeting, then Senator Sessions reacted negatively to Mr. Papadopoulos' idea and reportedly, quote, shut Papadopoulos down. Attorney General Sessions is reported to have said, quote, we're not going to do it. And I'd prefer that nobody speak about this again. If those reports are accurate, they would signal that then Senator Sessions reacted quite strongly to the suggestion that then candidate Trump should meet with President Putin. Such a strong reaction suggests that Attorney General Sessions would have remembered a conversation like that. Mr. Papadopoulos wasn't the only member of the campaign to tell Attorney General Sessions about his Russian contacts. Earlier this month, Carter Page, yet another former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor who is under scrutiny for his Russian contacts, testified to the House Intelligence Committee that he told then Senator Sessions about a trip to Russia that Page was going to take in July of 2016, where he met with Russian officials and state-owned businesses. Nonetheless, Madam President, time and time again, Attorney General Sessions has claimed under oath that he was unaware of any communications between Russians and members of the Trump campaign. During his confirmation hearing in January, when I mentioned reports that there was a, quote, continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government, the Attorney General said that he was, quote, not aware of any of those activities. My good friend Pat Leahy asked him in writing whether he, quote, had, quote, been in contact with anyone connected to any part of the Russian government about the 2016 election. The Attorney General answered simply, no. In June, Attorney General Sessions appeared before the Senate Intelligence Committee. In his opening statement, he said, quote, I have never met with or had any conversations with any Russians or any foreign officials concerning any type of interference with any campaign or election in the United States. Further, I have no knowledge of any such conversations by anyone connected to the Trump campaign. Senator Risch asked him, quote, did you hear even a whisper or a suggestion or anyone making reference within that campaign that somehow the Russians were involved in that campaign? Attorney General Sessions replied, quote, I did not. Senator Joe Manchin asked him, quote, are there any other meetings between Russian government officials and any other Trump campaign associates that have not been previously disclosed that you know of? Attorney General Sessions said that he did not recall any such meetings. Senator Kamala Harris asked him, quote, are you aware of any communications with other Trump campaign officials and associates that they had with Russian officials or any Russian nationals? Attorney General Sessions replied, quote, I don't recall that. Just last month, during the Attorney General's most recent appearance before the Judiciary Committee, Senator Lindsey Graham asked him, quote, did anybody in the campaign, did you ever overhear a conversation between you and anybody on the campaign who talked about meeting with the Russians? This time, Attorney General Sessions replied quite carefully. He said, quote, I have not seen anything that would indicate collusion with Russians to impact the campaign. But when I asked him to clarify his shifting explanations for his own interactions with the Russian ambassador, Attorney General Sessions said that when he first heard about reports of a, quote, continuing exchange of information between Russians and the Trump campaign, that he was, quote, taken aback by this dramatic statement that I'd never heard before and knew nothing about. He said that, quote, a continuing exchange of information between Trump's surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government did not happen, at least not to my knowledge, and not with me. Describing his January testimony, he said, quote, "And I said I'm not aware of those activities, and I wasn't, and am not, and don't believe they occurred." Madam President, setting aside the convenient amnesia that Attorney General Sessions seems to experience when asked about his own interactions with Russians or those that he witnessed, I find it disturbing that he went so far as to claim, as recently as October of this year, that he didn't believe that any meetings between Trump associates and Russians ever occurred. Just think about the Trump campaign members we know to have met with Russians from publicly available information. Carter Page, former campaign advisor. Paul Manafort, former campaign manager and chief strategist. Michael Flynn, the disgraced former national security advisor, who in 2015 spoke at a party honoring Russia's state-owned television network where he sat next to Vladimir Putin. Jared Kushner, White House advisor and son-in-law. And Donald Trump Jr., the president's son. Each and every one of these former members of the Trump campaign have had unusual contacts with the Russians. Nonetheless, just last month, the Attorney General said, and I quote, "I'm not aware of those activities, and I wasn't and am not, and don't believe they occurred," unquote. You know, I wanted to say to Attorney General Sessions, listen, I understand that you're recused from the Russia investigation, but do you think that means you're not allowed to watch the news or read a newspaper? My God, what is going on here? Madam President, it is clear that Attorney General Sessions has an ongoing difficulty remembering his own interactions with Russians and the extent to which he knew about Russian contacts with other members of the Trump campaign. And as the record demonstrates, Attorney General Sessions has misrepresented the truth about those contacts to members of this body time and time again. The interference by a hostile power in our nation's elections represents an attack on democracy itself, and the inability of our nation's top law enforcement official to speak with a clear and consistent voice about what he knows of the Russian operation is disturbing. Tomorrow morning, the Attorney General will appear before the House Judiciary Committee, where I am confident that he will once again face questions about this issue. It is my hope that this time, Attorney General Sessions will answer those questions honestly. But in light of his misrepresentations to members of this body, Attorney General Sessions has an obligation to return to the Senate and explain himself. Getting to the bottom of Russia's interference in the 2016 election is a matter of national security. And Attorney General Sessions owes the American people an explanation about what he knows. He needs to return to the Senate Judiciary Committee to set the record straight. Thank you, Madam President.